Welcome to the Dollars and Hops podcast, where we help you optimize your financial future. Here are your hosts, Scott and Lance.
Welcome back to the Dollars and Hops podcast. We are so excited you have joined us for episode 4, part 2 of our financial playbook. Scott, how are you doing, man? How are things going all the way up there in Maryland?
I'm doing great, Lance. I'm excited to get into the next 3 steps of the financial playbook. I'm also extremely excited to try some beer this evening, and I'm sure you are as well.
Indeed I am. So let's go ahead and just jump right in for the hops portion of our podcast. Scott, what are you sipping on this week?
Certainly. So this is from Crooked Hammock Brewery in Lewes, Delaware. It's a beer called Actively Fishing. It's a summer pilsner that I have left over from the summer. I actually planned on drinking a pumpkin ale, went to the liquor store, and somehow I walked out with a pumpkin cider, took one sip, said, can't rate that on the podcast. Not a cider guy. So
we don't do ciders here.
We're going with Actively Fishing from Crooked Hammock Brewery.
That's awesome. Excellent. I am so proud of you that you poured out that whole cider and that you just wasted it. I am sorry.
No good. I just, yeah. If you're in Maryland, let me know. I can leave it out on the porch for you.
Awesome. I'm going to go, if you listen to our last episode, I kind of was going towards one of my favorite breweries out in Seattle, Washington, Elysian Brewing. And they do have an awesome pumpkin pack out there for 2020. So sticking in that pumpkin pack, just working our way around it. We are economical here. We like to save where we can. Tonight, I'm going to be trying the Great Pumpkin, which is an imperial pumpkin ale. And I am very excited to dig into this one this episode. Scott, I think we're going to start this episode off with another headline of the week. And man, you've been doing your homework and doing it well to help educate myself and our listeners on what's some of the news out there. What'd you find for us?
Yeah, so this one I found off of CNBC. The headline says less than 11% of people with federal student loans are paying them during COVID-19. This is something I didn't really know what was going on because I don't have a federal student loan anymore. So I started digging into this. So in March, when the pandemic hit, the Department of Education offered borrowers a break from the paying their student loans and also from any interest that would be accruing. So currently, there's only 4.6 million out of 42 million borrowers who are actually paying down their student loan debt right now. And this is specific to federally backed loans. So if you have a private loan, that's completely different from anything that's managed by the Department of Education. They basically put these student loans in forbearance. And I got to thinking, hey, is that a good thing or a bad thing that only 4.6 million people are paying on their student loans? And the more I started thinking about it, I think that it's probably a good thing because there's better things that people could be doing with their money than paying on a student loan that's not accruing interest at all. They basically have a 0% loan, no payments right now. So I think it plays well with the financial playbook in that we think that there's some good things that you could be doing with your money, and you should probably prioritize those things over paying a student loan that has essentially no interest, no payments until the foreseeable future, whenever the federal or the Department of Education decides to make you continue paying your loan payments.
Excellent. Yeah, that's interesting times we live in right now. And I think it's more important now than ever just to make sure that you're staying on top of the financial news and how it affects your wallet. And so, Scott, that's a great article. We will have that linked up in our show notes for this episode. But let's go ahead and just jump right into our financial playbook. Since there's a lot still to cover, we only got through the first 2 steps last week. But as a quick recap, Scott, would you mind reminding our listeners, if you haven't listened to episode 3 yet, we strongly encourage you to go back, listen to episode 3 first, and then come back to this episode 4, to finish out the financial playbook. But Scott, what is meant again by order of operations?
So yeah, the order of operations or the financial playbook is really how you're utilizing the income that you have coming into your life and how to prioritize certain things. So many people don't understand maybe what they should be doing or what they should prioritize. What I mean by that, maybe you have student loans, maybe you have a mortgage, maybe you have, obviously everybody wants to save for retirement. Everybody wants to save for their child's 529 or their college savings. People sometimes get confused about what's best to do with the money. So we came up with this financial playbook. It's a 5-step process. We covered the first 2 steps. First one being establish a 3 to 6 month reserve fund, emergency fund for when times go bad. And the second step was to pay off all of your high interest debt. So that could be a high interest student loan. It could be your credit cards. We talked about a couple of different methods that you could use to pay down that debt, whether it be the debt snowball or the debt avalanche. And we're going to kind of continue on with the final 3 steps in this episode that we came up with.
So step 3 of our financial playbook for the Dollars and Hops podcast is going to be, drum roll, here's the revealing, it's contribute to and max out your retirement accounts. So this is going to be your employee-sponsored 401k, traditional IRAs, Roth IRAs, whatever it is. And we like to think about it like invest what you need to invest to be able to hit your retirement goals. And that's going to a whole bigger topic. We're going to have to tackle that on a different episode down the road. But really, after you've tackled your high interest debt in step 2, moving on to step 3 is contributing to and maxing out those retirement accounts. This is where we might have a lot of different situations, depending on where our listeners are coming from. They might be working for employees. They might be employees for companies that don't have any match. They might be employees for companies that provide 100% match up to 3% or 5% of contributions. Or they might have a completely different type of a match where they are matching a 10% of your contributions, not a 3 or 5% of your salary. And so there's all different types of matches. It can get very confusing. But the big idea here is that we want you to understand that there's major tax advantages and free money on the table if your employer does in fact offer a match. It's very important.
And who doesn't like free money?
Who doesn't want free money, right? We need to be able to take advantage of that match.
So from a prioritization standpoint, we would say if your employer offers a match on your 401k and you're offered a 401k at work, that is priority number 1. You need to contribute to your 401k at least what they will match. So if that's 3 or 5%, whatever the case might be, you want to at least contribute to get that maximum match. That's a 100% return right away as soon as they put the money in. And you really can't beat that. Outside of that, there could be, you might want to continue saving all the way up to the maximum of the 401k. Or if your plan has higher fees, you might want to consider a Roth or a traditional IRA for additional savings. So you definitely want to get that match because that's unbeatable. It's free money. And then outside of that, I would take a look at your actual plan guidelines and see what you're being charged as a management rate. And I would say anything that's over about a half a percent to 0.75% is probably a little bit too high to contribute to the 401k first. So you might want to take advantage of the free money that your employer is offering. And then outside of that, maybe establish a traditional or a Roth IRA.
Right. So just to recap that point that Scott just brought up is that let's say your employer offers a 3% match of your income for the year and you take advantage of that 3% match. So you would go ahead and contribute the 3% to take advantage of that match. And then with additional funds, you're going to go ahead and establish, probably a Roth IRA. And the reason is because that Roth IRA is going to grow tax-free over time. And you have $6,000 per year that you can contribute to a Roth IRA. It's a huge component to building wealth over time, a huge component to attaining and achieving your retirement goals by the time you are ready to retire, and then going back to max out the 401k or whatever other retirement account you might have in order to get those tax advantages. Because remember, with the 401k, it's not going to grow tax free, but you do get those tax advantages in the given tax year in which you contribute to that account.
Certainly. So, and I think it's important for everybody to understand what the limits are here. So, if we're talking about an IRA, it's a $6,000 limit unless you're 50 or older. If you're 50 or older, it's a $7,000 contribution limit. So we're saying, hey, get the match in your 401k, probably move over to contributing to either a traditional or a Roth. We prefer the Roth IRA if you're income eligible. Put that additional $6,000 or $7,000 in there. And then if you've got additional monies, go ahead and put it into the 401k and max that out so that you can get that tax savings in the current tax year.
So Scott, I think one more important thing to point out is that we will have future episodes where we do deeper dives into 401ks, Roth IRAs, the different tax advantaged retirement savings vehicles that are available, and all the different complicated rules that can sometimes make us feel overwhelmed and make it feel scary. And hey, really, it's not scary. These are tools to help you achieve your retirement goals, and they're important tools to know about. Know what you have access to at your employer, or if you don't have anything at your employer, you still have access to a Roth IRA. Anyone can open one as long as you have income in the given year and you're of age. So I think these are just huge topics for us to go deeper on future episodes. But for the purposes of this episode, our financial playbook, step 3, talking about contributing to and maxing out your retirement accounts in the most efficient way possible. This is how we think about it.
Absolutely. I think the bottom line here is, fund your 401k first if your company offers a match. If not, go straight to the IRA, then come back to the 401k. And with that, let's talk about step 4, Lance, which is saving for your child's 529.
Yeah. So obviously, if you don't have children, if you're not married, or if you don't have children, this may not be an option for you, and you can just skip this step. It's not a big deal. But if you're thinking about having children, or even think you might have a child one day, Scott actually did this. You can start a 529 even before they're born. And I'm going to let Scott talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah. So a lot of people don't know this, but yeah, you can actually start a 529 account really as soon as you want. So I started it about 2 years into my working career, probably 6 or 7 years at least before we had our first child. You can open an account and basically name yourself. You always want to make the account in your name yourself as the beneficiary. And then whenever you have a child, you can change the beneficiary designation to your child's name. So it's a good way for you to get an early start on your child's 529 contributions and college savings plan. As we know, college costs have gone up at a much higher rate than the rate of inflation. To take a step back here, I think a lot of people might be wondering, well, there might be a little bit of guilt when it comes to whether or not you should save for your child's future as far as their college is concerned before you save for yourself. There's a reason that we put this as step 4 and not step 3. And that reason is because you can't take a loan for your retirement. You can take a loan for your college, your child's college future. So I think that's an incredibly powerful statement in that that's the way you need to think about it. You need to prioritize yourself first. It's okay if your child has debt. Guess what? They're going to be one of many that has debt when it comes to college. You need to put your own retirement savings first before you move on to this step. I think that's incredibly important.
Here's an idea to think about. There will come a day, if you live long enough, if you are blessed enough to live long enough, there will come a day where you can no longer work. We are all getting older. We are all getting weaker and more tired, and our bodies are breaking down, and it's just a fact of life. None of us are getting out.
Yeah, you got to take care of yourself first. You really do. And that might sound selfish to you, but we're here to tell you that that's the right thing to do from a financial standpoint. And it's the best it's the right thing to do for your family at the end of the day.
And we're not saying you need to throw 100% of your dollars into retirement, right? We are big on living and giving on less than you make and investing the difference, right? So we're just saying that saving for your retirement is a huge, important component to our financial playbook. That's why we have it at step 3. And once you feel like, whether that's 10% of your income, 15% of your income, 20% of your income, whatever it is, going ahead and starting that and keeping that going over time to invest for your future, your retirement, when you no longer can work in the future, it's important. And then beyond that, if you have a desire to save for your child's future through education, there are some really cool options available for that as well. So Scott, what are some of the benefits of the 529?
So the 529 account is it's an account that you can establish with your personal, the state that you live in or another state's plan. There's multiple plans out there. But the purpose of the account is to be able to save for a college education. And the great thing is most or a lot of states will offer a tax deduction if you contribute to this plan up to a certain amount. And all the money that grows within that account is tax-free and is spent tax-free as long as it's for an eligible educational expense. So it's basically the equivalent of a Roth IRA, but for college. So it's incredibly powerful. All that money, all that interest that's earned over the course of time as you're saving in it, in these, low cost mutual funds, you get to spend tax-free for your child's college expenses.
Exactly. Tax-free growth for educational expenses for your children. That's kind of what a 529 is when you hear that term.
Absolutely. And there's certain plans that are better than others. There's a podcast that Lance and I both love, the Clark Howard Show. He does a very good job of actually looking at all of the different states' 529 plans that are offered and figuring out.
So each state has their own 529 plan?
Absolutely. Every state has their own 529 sponsored savings plan. Some of those state plans are lower fee than others. There's certain ones that are really, really good. Utah comes to mind. The Utah 529 savings plan is generally like the lowest fee. And there's certain state plans that are extremely high fee. So you might have 1% or more in fees that you're paying. And the important thing to...
Good gracious.
Yeah, the fees can get absolutely out of control in certain plans. So the important thing to know is you can actually save in any state-sponsored plan, even if you don't live in that state, and you can use it for eligible college expenses wherever your child decides to go for school. The one thing I would keep in mind is that if you save in your state plan, you might get a state tax deduction or state tax credit if you decide to save in that. So we
just recommend going ahead and doing the research to figure out if you could benefit from that.
I would definitely recommend. We're gonna link to this on dollarsandhops.com under the show notes tab to the Clark Howard 529 guide. He does a great job of kind of putting the state plans into individual buckets. I think he labels them as like Dean's List and Honor Roll and the state plans that you should stay away from. So we'll link to that.
Clever marketing for sure. And we do both love the Clark Howard Show podcast. I would recommend go ahead and subscribing to that podcast. It's just got some great information daily on your podcast feed if you're big into podcasts like we are.
Absolutely. And with that, we'll get to step number 5, which is building your wealth by investing in a brokerage account. So this is something that you do after you've established your emergency fund, after you have paid off your high interest rate debt, after you have contributed to your 401k and maxed out your retirement accounts, and after you have saved for your child's financial future using a 529 account, which is also an optional step. If you don't have kids, you don't do that step. So number 5 is building wealth by investing in the brokerage account. We definitely recommend any excess money that you have outside of all of these, different avenues that we've given to utilize your money. the best option is generally to establish a brokerage account and fund that brokerage account with low fee mutual funds or ETFs.
Right. And typically what we're talking about when we say mutual funds or ETFs, we're talking about index funds. And so this is in the stock market. I know for a lot of people who are not familiar with investing in the stock market, it can sound like a crapshoot. It can sound like gambling. It can sound like, how can I, there's so much risk involved, and there is risk involved, make no mistake. But when we're talking about investing in low fee ETFs or low fee mutual funds that are index funds, we're talking about broad strokes that take care of the entire stock market. So there's a couple funds we really love that are low fee that, we specifically want to get into. And we will have future episodes on these, but just to name a few, I know there's Schwab and Vanguard and Fidelity, again, are the three that will just run home all day long. We'll talk about it.
Yeah, and if you're curious, just do a Google search. Broad U.S. stock market index fund or ETF. They'll pop up, and take a look at the expense ratios on some of those that pop up. The lower the expense ratio, generally, the better the fund. It's going to have the lowest fees. And those funds are all very highly diversified. We can sit here and debate which fund is the best, but ultimately the main thing is getting your money working for you in a low cost fund. You might be able to find a fund that does a half a point better over the last 10 years, but who the heck knows what it's going to do in the next 10 years. So the main thing is getting the money working for you in a low cost index fund or ETF.
This is a core idea that we're going to explore in future episodes, but your market returns are never guaranteed, right? Market returns are never guaranteed. What is guaranteed is that expense ratio. And we know what those are. Those are published. Those are public information. You get to choose what you put your money into. And so a low expense ratio for us is going to be a 0.03 or 0.04 or even 0.05. That's very, very, very low.
And Fidelity has some 0.00 funds. They're called the zero funds, and they are the lowest fee out there. I think it's a loss leader for Fidelity, so I highly recommend their group of funds as well. I certainly invest in those, and the lower the fee, the better in general. The other thing I wanted to mention is that this brokerage account, is also an avenue for early retirement. So if you're a person that doesn't want to necessarily retire at what's considered retirement age, where, I don't know what that is. What is that, Lance? 60 and a half?
59 and a half.
So if you're someone who plans on retiring before 59 and a half, you're going to need a bucket of money to be able to utilize for those years before you're able to access your retirement accounts. So the brokerage account is a bridge account to be able to do that. I think we've talked about a bridge account on one of our previous episodes, but for somebody that might want to retire early, this is the account that you're going to pull from to live off of in early retirement if you choose to do so.
Right. And there's all kinds of cool rules we can talk about. The 4% rule, if you draw down 4%, there's all these statistics and studies that show that if you take 4% per year of a brokerage account or even a retirement account for that matter, then it will feasibly never run out because it's growing and compound growth. And so you can do some cool calculations with that. But as Scott pointed out, the brokerage account, the bridge account, the post-tax investment account, these are all the same account. We're just giving it different names. You might hear or see it in the personal finance world. It provides options. This is real money that's growing for you over time, and you're beginning to take advantage of market growth, stock market growth, companies that are for-profit, publicly traded, that are growing over time. You are getting little tiny pieces of those companies. And as it grows over time, your investments are growing over time, dividends are reinvested, and you begin to take advantage of the compound interest, the compound growth rates that really become exponential over time.
Perfect. And I think something that's pretty important to note here is we went through all 5 steps. We never talked about paying off low interest debt. So that might be something, for us, we feel like it's more important to invest rather than pay off that low interest debt. But that might not be what allows everyone to sleep best at night. There's going to be certain people that feel like paying off their 3% or 4% mortgage is more important than investing for their future in a brokerage account. And that's fine. From a mathematical standpoint, we could sit here and argue that and say that it's probably better to put the money in a brokerage account.
And risk, right? Because you have to take into account risk as well.
Absolutely. But for us, as part of the financial playbook, we're kind of saying, hey, pay as agreed on these low interest debts and focus on building wealth before you would pay off the low interest rates.
Yeah, and I just add on to that. I love the way you put that. I think for some people who are more risk averse, right, that might be the better plan for them to go ahead and just pay off all your debt before you really start a brokerage account, before you start step 5. You might need to just go back and knock out that house to, it might make you might sleep better at night having your house completely paid off. You might value that more than going ahead and building wealth and investing and putting your dollars at risk for the sake of growing over time. I would just invite you to do the research, look at the overall multi-decade returns in the market, broadly speaking, in the US stock market,
which is about 8 to 10% per year. And then we're comparing that to the low interest rate debt. So that's why we were coming to that conclusion is, hey, you got this 8 to 10% return that you can earn in the stock market theoretically, and you're comparing that to some low interest rate debt. That's why we're prioritizing investing over paying off that low interest rate debt.
And because everybody's different, we know that some people, that really might be the better plan to pay off the house first. But in any case, that is the financial playbook. That's how we think about our finances. That's really the framework we are working through, the financial ladder, if you will, climbing the rungs of the ladder in order to build wealth. And of course, giving all the way. We didn't really talk a whole lot about giving over the last episode or this episode, but really that should be a part of your monthly budget. And there should be giving categories in that budget, which should be accounted for in your emergency fund as well. But I do want to say that, this really is how we live our life. This is how we invest our dollars. This is how we think about any extra money that comes in for us. This is what we're doing with that money. This is how we invest for the future.
And with that, we're going to get to the next segment of the podcast where these are questions that need answers. This one comes from an anonymous listener. This one says, how do my spouse and I have unity on finances when one doesn't seem to care at all?
Yeah, this is a tough one. My wife, Carolyn, and I have been through this, and we continually work through this. So I'm the financial nerd in our household, and my wife, I love her so much, and she's just doesn't really care. And that's part of what makes her so amazing and special. And balances me out. But I would say, one thing is doing a budget together, going back to our episode 2 and actually thinking about your monthly budget and getting on the same page together. And then having a dream conversation can be really cool. Maybe over a date night or a date breakfast, or getting your significant other, your spouse, out of the house, at a restaurant, in a park, some kind of place that's outside of your normal routine. And with the intention of making that time specific for, hey, dreaming, hey, what if we did have this amount of money and we wanted to give here, we could give this much and we could invest here and we could pay for this child's college, or we could do all these great things. Like, what would we want to do? What would we want to achieve? What kind of legacy would we want to leave? Sometimes those types of conversations can kind of get the creative juices flowing and build up some desire to, have the other spouse care and get involved and be a part of the planning process. So that might be how I would suggest our listener approach that with their spouse. We actually got one more question from a listener. And again, if you do have questions, please submit them. We got an email address set up, questions@dollarsandhops.com, or you can head over to our website, dollarsandhops.com. There's a couple buttons there where you can submit questions as well. But we got one more question here. Question from another anonymous listener. Scott, should you still give to charity when you're in debt? Should you still give to charity?
Certainly. I think a lot of people struggle with this. Obviously, I think charity can be near and dear to a lot of people's hearts. Some people might feel guilty in giving to charity when they might have debts of their own. I think the situation definitely matters, but the answer to the question, at least from my perspective, would be absolutely. I think that it's incredibly powerful to build charity into your monthly budget, even when you are in debt. In my opinion, there's nothing that feels better than being able to give each and every month to something that we care about deeply as a family. And I think that maybe there's not enough people that actually build it into their budget, and you should consider doing so. Even if it's an extremely small amount, it will feel good to have it as part of your budget. And there's nothing more powerful than giving to people that are in need, or animals that are in need, or whatever makes you feel the best. Go ahead and give. It'll make you feel better, and you'll get it back in droves doing that act of kindness.
Well said, Scott. And I think it's just important to remember, like, stewardship, right? Like, we're only here for a short time, and while you're here, you're going to use it for the way you want to use it, and then you're gone, and you ain't taking it with you. And so, how did you use it when you were here, right? And so, it's just an interesting idea to explore. I love that answer, Scott. Very, very well done. So, our last portion of the podcast, our Hops Showdown. Scott, your beer this week, how did it rank?
Yeah, so again, I was drinking the Actively Fishing Summer Pilsner from Crooked Hammock Brewery in Lewes, Delaware. It was definitely a very refreshing beer, great for a summer day, even a fall day like today. I definitely enjoyed it. I thought it was very easy drink, and would definitely recommend it. I would give it a score of a 91.
Oh, well done. As a reminder, on this episode, I was drinking another pumpkin brew from Elysian Brewing out there in Seattle, Washington. This was the Great Pumpkin, the Imperial Pumpkin Ale. I will say this one, it packed a punch. I think the overall alcohol by volume is over 8%, and it definitely is kicking my tail right now. But it's almost like a
feeling it.
It's not really like an IPA, but it's almost like a pumpkin IPA would be. And I do love my IPAs. I will say, golly, I don't know. We've never had a tie before, but I really feel like I was leaning towards 90. I think it's going to be a 90. I think it's a 90. It was fantastic. It was a great beer, but it's a 90.
All righty. And with that, we want to leave you with our action step. We obviously went over the financial playbook today. There was 5 main steps. Ask yourself, where are you in the financial playbook? What step are you on? And set goals for yourself on what step you plan to get to and when. We'll post all of our show notes at dollarsandhops.com. We'll also have a graphic which will show each of the 5 steps in the financial playbook. So be sure to check that out, dollarsandhops.com. We also love your questions. Please send us a question, questions@dollarsandhops.com.
This is Lance.
This is Scott.
Live and give on less than you make and invest the difference. Dollars and Hops out.
You have been listening to the Dollars and Hops podcast. Optimizing your financial future starts with taking action today. Got a question? Shoot us an email at questions@dollarsandhops.com, and the guys will tackle it on a future episode. Visit our website, dollarsandhops.com, for show notes and the craft brew lineup for each episode. And please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. Thanks for listening.